So for those of you that are here for the first time today, we have been going through a series on the life of Joseph. I've been looking forward to doing this series for a long time, and I have a great admiration for Joseph. I think him with Daniel in the Bible particularly are people in the Bible that are most Christ-like for me. And so in order to get you where we are, if you haven't been here, I'm going to give you a little overview of what we've looked at. We're also going to look at the 3 chapters that we're missing from last week. So we got to chapter 41 last week, Pharaoh's dreams. We are now going to be in 45, but I'm going to give you an overview of what's gone on because it's helpful. So far, Joseph has been treated like a favorite son by Jacob. And he was sold by his brothers into Egypt. And as far as they cared, he's probably died along the way. And then he's bought as a slave by Potiphar. And Potiphar is head of the armed guard for Pharaoh. And over time, the wife of Potiphar fancies Joseph and then decides to try it on. And he is falsely accused and thrown into prison. And then he prospers in prison. He tells some interpretations of some dreams for the baker and the cupbearer. And over time, after being there for a further 2 years, he is released by Pharaoh, and he interprets Pharaoh's dream. And then he is released by Pharaoh, and he's enabled to rule over Egypt as second in command under Pharaoh. Then we come to chapter 42, which you wouldn't have read with us here because we're not doing it, but I'm going to give you an overview of that. The famine of Pharaoh's dream has come to light. It's true, it's happened, and Jacob sends Joseph's brothers to Egypt in order that they may get some food because they are feeling the effect of the famine. In verse 6 to 7, Joseph's brothers arrive and they bow down to Joseph, confirming the dreams that he had right in the beginning of Genesis' story about Joseph. Joseph pretends to be a stranger to them. They don't know who he is. He's dressed like an Egyptian. He sounds like an Egyptian, and he speaks the language of an Egyptian, and therefore they cannot tell that it is their brother. But he knows who they are, and he speaks to them harshly, and he accuses them of being spies. In a conversation between the brothers, Joseph overhears that they are starting to believe that their harsh treatment is because of the way they treated their lost brother Joseph years before. Now, Joseph, having not revealed himself at this time, decides that he will hide himself, and he weeps and has tears. The one brother that is not on this journey is Benjamin. Benjamin is the brother of Joseph, of the same mother, Rachel, who was the favorite wife of Jacob, and he's not there. Eventually, Joseph keeps back Simeon and allows the brothers to go back home so that they will fetch Benjamin and bring him back because he wants to see his brother, and he tells them that I want to see him to show that you're telling the truth about having another brother. And it says that they bound Simeon before Joseph, which I believe is a deja vu, a sort of showing to them what it was like to be bound before them when they sold him off into Egypt. On the way home, the brothers find that their money that they gave for the grain is still within their sacks. When they get to Jacob, they realize that all the money they paid for the grain is still in their sacks with their grain. And it sends great fear across the brothers and Jacob himself because they feel that probably that Joseph in Egypt is probably going to think that they took the money and ran. So they're filled with fear. And Jacob says, there's no chance that my son Benjamin is going down there. He may never come back. Then we move on to chapter 43. The famine gets really bad, and Jacob finally agrees that Benjamin can go to Egypt. Judah offers his own children as collateral for Benjamin if he wasn't able to come back. He says, you may take my children and kill them. So he offers himself personally responsible for Benjamin. When they arrive in Egypt, Joseph wines and dines them, which is a bit of a surprise considering the way he treated them the first time. And he wines and dines them, and they suspect that he's doing it in order to kill them. And so they go up to the guard and they say, look, the whole thing with the money, we didn't mean to take the money back. And the guard says, no, I received your money. The money you've received in your sack is a blessing from God. You're absolutely fine. Stop worrying. You're okay. And then the brothers bow down to Joseph again, further fulfilling the dreams that he had, that they would bow down to him in the future. Then Joseph learned that his father was well, and he met his brother Benjamin, and then he hid and he cried again. And finally, in chapter 43, he surprises his brothers by setting the table with them in age order, and he gives Benjamin 5 times more meat than any of the others. And then moving to chapter 44, which is a lot shorter in my summary, is that Joseph sends his brothers home with grain, yet he plants a cup in Benjamin's sack so that he might catch up with them and bring him back as a slave, falsely accusing his own brother of taking his own cup to bring him in. Judah approaches Joseph and he offers himself for Benjamin, as losing Benjamin would bring their father to the grave, and that would hurt him dearly. And now we come to chapter 45. So if you want to turn to Genesis 45, that's just a little bit of an overview because it's good to know where we are and what's happened. If you didn't get any of that, it's always good to listen to the sermons again. So do it, and you will be able to understand what on earth I'm on about. We will touch on some of those things within today's talk, but I just want you to have an overview of what's happened since last week. So Genesis 45, the whole chapter is not too long. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You and your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded to me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly.' Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, he talked with him. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can enjoy the fat of the land.' You are also directed to tell them, 'Do this. Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all of Egypt will be yours.' So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving, he said to them, 'Don't quarrel on the way.' So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, 'Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt.' Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived, and Israel said, I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. If I ever tell you that there's not much scripture, don't ever listen to me again. That was long and it was hard. So, a number of years ago, we found out we were having a baby. Me and my wife. Don't tell Rachel. And so me and my wife found out we're having a baby, or having Evangeline. And the first thing my wife says to me, she says, the Peugeot's going. And I looked at her and said, why is the Peugeot going? It's a great car. Have you not seen? It's got heated seats. It's got air conditioning. Did I tell you it's got heated seats? It's a great car. In fact, it is a brick on wheels. The child will be so safe in that car. Why would we ever get rid of the Peugeot? It's awesome. In fact, if I could name my old car, I'd name it You Should See the Other Guy. Whenever I hit a car in that car, you never noticed there was a mark on it. This is the car to drive. I'll tell you, I was so excited. I said, no, the car is staying. She said, let me just show you the crash test on the European website. I said, all right then. So the short of it is that we had to get a new car because it was a brick on wheels apparently to me, but to no one else. Looks can be deceiving, can't they? You go out and buy a car, it looks really nice. It doesn't mean it's going to be a very strong car. You never know how strong something really is. You never know until you have tested the integrity of that item. Unless it's been tested, you'll never know if it really is strong or not. And there are many Christians in this world that fail the crash test. There are many of us that fail the crash test and the integrity test. We may make the right noises. We may even look a little bit holy. But when we come to the crash test and we crash, does integrity and faith survive after that crash? When we really get tested, we said all the right things in church, we've done all the right things, we look holy, we sound holy, all of our Christian friends go, oh, I wish I could be like that person, he's really holy. But when we hit an incline, do we stall? When we hit a crash test, do we find that faith has disappeared, been shattered, and not survived? Last week we learned that Joseph had to be refined by God, and he declared when he had come out of prison, he declared the names of his children, that he had left the past, that he had forgotten the hurt, and he had moved forward. And then when we get to chapter 45 here today, what we find is the moment that Joseph's words would be tested to see if his words matched his actions. Have you ever thought about that in your life? Do my words match what I do? When I say I forgive, do I really forgive? When I say these things, do I really do it in my heart, or is it just one big show? Are you a genuine article of a Christian like Jesus, or are you like my Peugeot? That when it's put under test, when it's put under pressure, the integrity fails. And the faith you have in that car no longer exists. Are you like my Peugeot? That's where we start today. And we start by looking at true repentance. Genesis 42 to 45, the chapters, that is not the verses, is like a perfect soap. If you're watching EastEnders, this would be better. Because you see so many twists and so many turns and so many things that go on. And you think, why did that happen? You can almost hear the viewers saying, kill him, Joseph. Look what they did to you. Show yourself from the sympathetic people. Show who you are. And you can all have some great big family get-together. Show yourself. Come on. And you're all on the edge. And then it goes doom, 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 doom. Next week. It must be a little bit like the sermons here, isn't it? You get to the end, you feel, oh, don't end there, surely. Surely. Yeah, good. But it's not a soap. It's real life. And we have to try to imagine what it's like. When I read those verses that says that he revealed himself to his brothers, I'm not just saying this, the whole words, action things, I genuinely feel like I want to cry. When I was reading there, I was thinking, don't look like a sissy today. Come on, don't do it, Mike. But it does, because it is an incredible story. But you have to put yourself in Joseph's shoes to really understand this story and to really feel it. Because his brothers took away his life. They took away his brother. They took away his father. They took away his wealth. They took away his identity. And they sold him. And they got rid of him to die. And now they stood right in front of him saying, we need mercy. They don't know who he is at this point, but they're saying, we need mercy. And Joseph is the one who has to decide if he's going to do it. How would you feel? Would you feel angry for those years that you've been away? Would you feel anxious? Are they telling the truth? Would you feel confused? What would you be feeling if you were Joseph? But Joseph held it together, but he cried 3 times privately so that they would not see. And yet, despite these emotions, Joseph demonstrated 2 very interesting attributes. The first, which you would expect of a man of God, is wisdom. The second, surprisingly, you would not expect, was deception. Have you ever asked the question why Joseph took his cup and put it in Benjamin's sack? I mean, that doesn't sound like a very godly man, does it? He has deceived him. He's probably learned it from his father because his father was a deceiver as well in his early days. Why would you plant something on your brother when you're a godly man? Why would you do that? Well, there's one thing. We must always remember that whilst there are types of Jesus in the Bible, none of them ever are Jesus. That actually, if you're looking for the perfect man beside Jesus, you won't even find him in the Bible, because Jesus is the one, the only one. It says in Revelations that they're sad because there's no one to come and open the seals, and everyone's really upset. And all of a sudden, they said, don't be upset, because the Lamb that is slain, he can open the seals. Only him. Only the Lamb that was slain. And the Lamb that was slain was Jesus. He is the only one that died for the whole world. Only he is perfect. So Joseph still got a way to go, and he used some deception. However, he may have deceived, but he was very, very wise, because he was putting his brothers through that integrity test that I talked about at the beginning. The first test that he puts them through is the vertical test. After Joseph had planted the cup into Benjamin's sack so that he could be caught and taken in, Judas spoke up, and he said this: what can we say? Speaking on behalf of his brothers. What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. Finally, the brothers had revealed their guilt. Finally, they have revealed to Joseph that they do have a relationship with God, that they are guilty. Finally, they had revealed that they had done wrong to Joseph, because they weren't giving themselves up for the cup, because they never took the cup. So how could they be guilty in the eyes of God? No, they were giving themselves over because they realized, and as we've seen in the last few chapters, that they had realized that the sin that they committed against Joseph had caught up with them. Be sure your sins will find you out. They had realized that they had done something wrong, something seriously wrong, and their guilt had caught them. But this was test 1, achieved and passed, because Joseph was looking to see if they really had a vertical relationship with God. He was working out if they were really, really, really sorry in the eyes of God. He was trying to test them to see if they could be trusted. And then there was a horizontal test. Judah and his brothers were free. They could go, because Joseph said, "Be it from me that I will take you all when there's only one man that is guilty." He says, "I will take the one guilty man." And then Judah speaks up, and this is me paraphrasing. He says this: "Take me in the boy's place. Please don't take another son from my father, because if you do, you will take his gray hair down to the ground and he will die in misery. I can't see that. I don't want to see more misery on my father that we've already caused." He says, "Take me instead." He's speaking on behalf of the brothers. What is he doing? He's showing that Joseph's horizontal test had been complete. First of all, vertical was love the Lord your God. Second of all, was to put yourself before others. In the past, because they didn't like Joseph, they sold him off to his death. But now they were saying, "Don't take my brother. Don't let anyone else feel the misery. Please, take me instead." They had changed. And Joseph was testing them to see, have you got a live and kicking relationship with God? I'm testing you to see. And then he was testing them to see if he would love others before himself. It's the first 2 greatest commandments: love the Lord your God and love others before yourself. Joseph was testing them to see if they were true to their words. You know, all Christians must be forgiven, must give forgiveness. All Christians must forgive. And all people must be forgiven. However, not all people can be trusted. I want you to think about that for a minute, because there are lots of you in here that have a problem with someone in your life. You do, you're just not admitting it. You know, not all of you, but there are some people in here that have a genuine problem with someone in their life, and they say things like, "I've forgiven that person." But to say you've forgiven them and every time you poke that person, you want to say something horrible about them, you haven't really forgiven them. You don't really even like them. And here is the thing. All Christians must forgive all people. All people must be able to receive forgiveness, but not all people can be trusted with what they get. And what am I saying here? Well, we need to work this out. A girl came to see me this week, and she said to me, there is a person that I know who is a Christian, and I know as a Christian that I have to forgive them for what they did to me. She says, what do I do? Because I don't trust them, I don't believe they've changed, and I believe they're going to hurt me. And now, anyone here that's thinking there's an easy answer to that, and even as a pastor, I'm sitting there thinking, help, Lord, and I genuinely said that in my head. I'm thinking, give me an answer that I don't know. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, and I said to her, it takes great wisdom. And I paused, and I just waited, and I'm thinking, please, God. And all of a sudden, this came into my head very confidently. Jesus forgave many people, but he only surrounded himself with the 12. Think about that for a minute. Jesus forgave many people, but he only surrounded himself with the 12. He also cast out demons, and the people would say, I want to come with you. He said, no, go back and share with the people in your towns. He never invited them into his close, vulnerable, safe place. He chose 12 that he would be with. He chose them to share and to be vulnerable with. He didn't give that to everyone. So he forgave many people, but he didn't bring everyone into that close, safe, vulnerable space. You see, forgiveness is non-negotiable. You have to forgive if you are a Christian. Yet, like Joseph, you must assess whether the person you are forgiving is safe enough to bring back into the same relationship you had in the first place. Are they safe to bring into your vulnerable space? Let me give you an example, because I know there will be people here thinking, well, no, I don't quite agree. If you have someone that continually steals from you or continually hurts everyone in your household, is it safe to bring them back into your household? It's not, is it? You are a mug if you do that. Just think about it for a minute. If you bring someone into your house that continually does something and they are a danger to everyone in the house, you can forgive them, but you need to put a boundary in place. Jesus forgave many people, but he didn't bring all of them into the 12. He had a safe space, a vulnerable space where he was vulnerable with people. Are you wise when you forgive? Because you must forgive, but you must be wise in the relationship that you uphold further on. Think about it like this, the prodigal son. Prodigal son goes off, spends all the wealth that he's taken from his father, early inheritance, and he goes off and lives a really reckless life. And he goes off, he spends all that time wasting his money. Then one day he realizes that this is not a life, I've lost everything, it is killing me, this sin. And then he returns to the father. What does he have to do in order to go back to the father? He has to turn away from his old life, and he has to walk in an opposite direction, which is repentance, turning around and walking the other way, and to go back to his father. When he'd done that, what did he find? A father with his arms wide open, ready to love him and wanting him home, because his father had already forgiven him, but he had to turn around and walk away to go back into that relationship with God again. And it's the same here with Joseph's brothers. He was testing them to see if they had turned around from where they were, and they walked back towards Joseph, and what do they find? His loving, gracious arms. True repentance is important to receive true forgiveness. So true forgiveness. The brothers passed the test. Now Joseph had a test of his own from God. Could he pass the integrity test? Would he truly forgive his brothers? Well, let me just remind you what it says in the first 5 verses. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were unable to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one who you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me here ahead of you to preserve a remnant on the earth and to save lives by a great deliverance. What did we see in Joseph in this time? What do we see in the message that we get from Joseph? What can we see in his life and the way that he treats his brothers? What we see is true forgiveness. Because what we see in Joseph is something very different to what we see in the world and the way that we live. We often hear in the Christian society, we hear, I've forgiven that person, but I don't want to do that with them, or I don't want them to come close to me here, or next time you speak to me. In fact, I had someone recently come to me and said, Mike, I've forgiven that person. God has done a work in me. Have we all heard that before? And then a week later, I'm speaking to the same person, and they're slagging off the same person they forgave a week ago. And I'm thinking, what has happened in a week? Unless there is a bitterness that is still in their heart. And I don't know about you, but I've been in that place where I say, I've forgiven them, and God has done a work in me, and I've forgiven them, and I'm never going to be like that again. But we just do. And whenever someone does anything and says anything about that person, we're secretly smiling inside, saying, well, I don't like them either. It's true, isn't it? We do it, and we just try to pretend because we're Christians that we forgive them. Or the other one is that I'll forgive anything, but that thing is too deep. But we have to look at Joseph. He was sold to his death. He was sold by his own brothers to die, and he forgave them. Jesus hung on a cross to forgive all the people in the world, the murderers and everyone. If they are to ask for forgiveness, he forgave them, and he hung on a cross. He was killed. How can there ever be anything that is too deep for us to forgive? Is there anything that we should not be able to forgive? So much Christian forgiveness is disingenuous. It doesn't even stack up. The words of forgiveness don't even match our actions. We don't know how to forgive many times. And is our forgiveness like my Peugeot going back, that it is unforgiving and it's dangerously deceiving? Do we really forgive when we say that we have forgiven? I come from a very forgiving family. We have to have forgiven each other a lot. We know how to have ding-dongs in my family. We really do. Any families like that in here? Yeah, got one of those. I've got one hand. She's very excited to tell me. But the thing is, we knew how to have ding-dongs in our family, but we knew also how to forgive each other. I can remember one day that I was always sort of like, if the parents fall out with a sister, I'll go with the parents because the parents have the house, so I'm safe. And I remember one day that it all kicked off downstairs. I could hear it all going mental, and I thought, this time I'm going to take the sister's side. Let's just see what it's like, So it gets to that point, the whole, you better go, you better move out. And sister's like, well, I'm off then. And I said, if she goes, I go. And the parents are like, see you later then. So me and my sister are walking up the road, and I said, so what do we do now then? Where are we going? She said, well, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? You've just caused that revolution. And now she goes, follow me. We end up in the woods opposite, just before you get to Ellsworth Lakes on the right-hand side. So we're sitting down, and I'm going, this is great, isn't it? She's looking at me nervously, thinking, where are we going to go? Didn't have mobile phones in those days. And after about 10 minutes, she said, do you know what? I can't do this to you. I think I better take you back. I said, what, how? We can't go back? I said, what about the revolution? If we go back, the parents are going to think we're weak. How are we going to live with ourselves? How's that going to happen? I can't go back there. Now they think that I'm in charge, and it's not going to know. No, I'm the boss round here. We've got to stay in the woods. She says, getting cold. I said, okay, we'll go back. We are going back. But I'm not happy about it. But in our family, there were some ding-dongs, but I can tell you something, that most of us are here today in this room, and we all love each other because forgiveness is important. But forgiveness has to be real. It doesn't mean you always agree with everything everyone ever does to you, but you have to be able to say that you love and you forgive and that you've changed and that they've changed. You have to be able to love someone. But so often in church, I see people that really don't know how to forgive. They know how to say they've forgiven, but they don't know how to forgive. I was told this week by someone in this church that, I don't know who it is, they wouldn't tell me because I'd get them, but apparently I look 48. Forgiveness can be hard. Forgiveness can be hard. But we have to practice it. And we have to mean what we say. And we have to be ready to do as Joseph did. And let us have a look at what he did. The first thing he did is he broke down uncontrollably. I don't think he was faking it. When someone breaks down so the next rooms can hear them crying, that's a little bit over the top. He meant this. He was desperate to be back with his brothers. Then he reveals his identity. He says, I am Joseph. Ani Yasafi. I am Joseph. I'm your brother. Is my father still alive? And they're terrified, and so they should be. I'd be thinking, push them down a well. Let them see how it feels. Sell them. Do something to them, Joseph. He says, no, I'm your brother. Don't be scared. And then he says, come close. And the Hebrew here is nagash, and it refers not to spatial proximity, but it means a close relationship. He is drawing his brothers back in. He wants to be in relationship with his brothers because he's full of grace. And then he reassures them. He says, don't be afraid. I was sent here by God, not by you. I've come to save Israel, and I've come to save the world. I've been sent here by God. This is my calling. You just happen to be used in it. And then he embraces them, and then he kisses them, and then he speaks with them. Would you like to be a fly in the wall? Hey, Joseph, do you remember those games we used to play where we used to push you down a well? You know, that was a laugh, wasn't it? And do you remember those traders that came by? We sold you. Ha, ha, ha. You know, could you love to be on the fly in the wall for that conversation? You would, wouldn't you? This is incredible forgiveness. And then he finally moves them to Goshen, where they will be there as a generation for 430 years, until Pharaoh gets the hump with them and Moses steps in and off they go and through the Dead Sea and then on the way to salvation through Jesus. But they are sent and they are blessed by Joseph and they are embraced and they are loved. Does that not sound like real forgiveness? Has anyone here ever tasted that sort of forgiveness? Has anyone ever dished that meal up before? Or are we all here thinking, I'd love to see that happen because it's a little bit too much? And could Joseph have done that if he hadn't forgiven? And he had bitterness in his heart? Joseph passed the integrity test. His brothers had passed their integrity test. He had passed his integrity test. When he said he had forgotten and moved on and got on with life, he really had. And now he was proving it. Pope John Paul II in 1981 was shot 4 times. And he was shot 4 times by a man with a gun, obviously. And he had 5 hours of surgery and he was dying and he almost died. And in 83, he went back to the guy that had shot him, and he went into the prison to see him. And this is what he said when he came out. He said, what we talked about will have to remain secret between him and me. I spoke to him as a brother whom I have pardoned and who has my complete trust. That is outrageous grace. That is outrageous forgiveness. And I ask you today, do you know that forgiveness? Have you received that forgiveness? Have you given that outrageous grace? I met a woman in this church. She told me that her father had abused her sexually all of her life. I said, do you see that man now? She said, do I see him? I take him Sunday lunch every week. That is outrageous grace. And these are extreme cases. So why do we struggle with just the little cases of that person said something about me and, it's all a misunderstanding, but I just can't be bothered to forgive them? Is it pride? The question I want to ask you before we come to the final point is this. Is God at work in you? Is he speaking right now and saying, you know that person in your family that you really hate, like they've murdered you or something, but actually they just said something a number of years ago that you haven't forgiven? Maybe God's saying to you today that you need to go and do something about that. Maybe God's saying today, could you pray that actually he could speak to you about that situation so you understand why what happened. Because true repentance demands true forgiveness. And why is that? It's because the whole story of Joseph is a picture of the story of Jesus. It is about grace, which brings me to the final part of our story today, true gospel. Joseph's story is a picture of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Joseph's story is about grace. It's about grace for me. It's about grace for you. It's about grace that you will give out because you have received that grace. It starts with unspeakable sin, selling a brother into slavery to death. And it ends with this outrageous grace that only Jesus can show us. Only the faith of Christianity knows the grace of Jesus Christ. Joseph's family and his brothers had realized that their sin wasn't unseen, that God has seen it, and it was destroying them. The brothers have rejected Joseph, but in rejecting Joseph and his dreams, they had in fact rejected God. By saying that they were going to get rid of him, they were getting rid of God. It's all back to the Garden of Eden. It's saying, I'm rejecting God in my life. He has spoken, I don't want to hear it, I want to kick him out. It's the same story over and over again. So they sold Joseph, just as Judas sold Jesus. And they rejected God's purposes, just as the religious people of Jesus' times rejected God's purposes in Jesus, and they rejected him and killed him. In the same way that the world, all of us reject his word today and do not want to live like Jesus has told us to live, even though he is good and he is gracious. We've rejected God's purposes. And where has it led our world? What is it, 41 and counting knife crimes this year in this country? 41 people dead? Is that right? That's where our world is, and the morality of this world and the way that it tells us to live and all of the different morals and the morality failures, and pornography is now like your big DVD collection for every person. This is mad. If we think this world is a good place and a lovely place, we need to know that actually this is not the way God intended it to be. We need to ask ourselves, is this right? Because the brothers sold off God and rejected God and his purposes. And what did they get out of it? They got a bleak life. They got a bleak circumstance. They got a bleak future. They had nothing. And it's exactly the same future that we've accepted as a world. We decided that actually we're going to reject God because the Christians are stupid and don't know what they're doing. But here's the thing. C.S. Lewis once said, he said, if you aim at heaven, you'll get earth chucked in. If you aim at earth, you will end with nothing. You will end with absolutely nothing. If you aim at heaven, you'll get earth with it. If you aim at earth, you'll end with nothing. The fall of the world started with the sin. It continues with us, and we see it in the world, but Jesus offers grace. And I ask you the question, do you know his grace? Have you received his grace? Are you willing to ask the question, am I here by accident, or is there a future to a place where we are going? Have you ever asked that question? Am I going somewhere? Why am I here? What on earth is going on and where am I going? Do you ask that question, or do you go with everyone else's idea that, Christianity is a load of bump and it's a load of stupidity? Then why are you here? You've traveled here on some sort of asteroid and landed here and you've got this great civilization of very intelligent people. Do you really think that sounds like an intelligent story? Think it through. It's not. I want to end with two, if the band want to come back, two stories of two hands. A couple of weeks ago, I went to see a man. I sat down and I shared with him the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as I'm sharing it, it was like hitting a brick wall. And I'm like, why is this not going in, Lord? Help me. And so I left there feeling pretty depleted, but hoping and praying that God would do something. I go back and see the guy 2 weeks later. He said, what did we talk about? I said, lots of stuff. He said, a lot of rubbish, didn't we? I said, well, we did until we got to the bit of faith. He goes, why don't we start there? He grabs my hand with both of his. He pours it into his chest, and he says, I want to give my life to Jesus. I want to give my life to Jesus. I want to say the prayer now. A year ago, so this guy has grabbed eternity with both hands. A year ago, I went to see another man. He was due to die within hours. And I go to see him. He's in that stage where they could probably hear, maybe it's the last thing that goes, and he's not responding to anything. I said to the family, can I sit and can I pray with him? I sit next to this man on a bed, and to their shock, as I started to speak, he started to move. He was moving his arms, he was trying to look to me and listen, he was doing all of this, and they said, he hasn't moved, he shouldn't be doing this, this is odd. And they were getting really excited. And I said to this man, I said, okay, you are going to die in a few minutes, or hours, or whatever. And I said to him, but do you want to know where you're going? And do you want to receive Jesus? And if you do want to see Jesus, I can see that you're able to move your arms. Could you just move your arm up a little bit and we'll pray now? And he went like this. And he pushed his covers right down the bed. This is a man that couldn't move. And he threw the covers off and he was throwing it around. And he was looking at me with these really weird eyes. The stories are this. On one story, you've got a guy that grabs eternity with both hands. You've got another story of a man that rejected God even on his deathbed with all the energy that he didn't have because he did not want to know Jesus. And I want to say to you today is, what will you do? Will you accept no future, a bleak future, or will you receive the forgiveness of Jesus Christ? And finally, I had a guy this week that said to me, my mother-in-law died last week, and all of her life and her husband's life, we've been collecting china. And they collected china, they stored it into every cupboard in every place in the house, and they said, we're going to collect it because it's worth a bit now, but in years to come, we will be rich. So they got every cupboard in this house filled with china. Husband dies. Woman doesn't have much energy to go out and sell it. So then she dies, and the family come in and say, why is all this china here? Because they were going to get rich. So they called in the auctioneers. The auctioneers come in, and they look around all this china, and they say to them, China's worth nothing nowadays. It's worth nothing nowadays. And here's the moral of the story, is that many of us are banking on this life. Many of us are storing up everything, all our treasures and all our hope in this life. If you leave it too late, someone's going to come in the end and say it's worth nothing. You have this time to make your decision whether you want to live forever and see your family again, or whether you just want to disappear for eternity, or if worse, suffer for eternity. And I leave it with you today. If you haven't received, if you haven't truly repented, if you haven't received true forgiveness, I want you to know that you can. The only thing that will stand in the way of you receiving it is pride. Will you receive Jesus Christ? If you'd like to do that today, there will be a team here after the service. It will be between you and them. I'm not going to do an altar call, so you can all raise your hand and look how good the preacher is. You go and see one of those people in the prayer team, and you ask them to pray with you to receive Jesus. And I guarantee you one thing: you will live forever. Your life will change from today. May God bless you, and may you know him by the end of this service, because you may not have another day. You may not have another day. Amen.